So we are on week 3, so welcome back, everyone. I'm glad that you are here again. To start this week, like I promised last week, we are going to start with questions that I have been asked. Now, if you ask a question, I just want to make sure that everybody knows I'm keeping the questions anonymous and trying to promote more questions. I know that sometimes people are very embarrassed to ask questions, but I want you to feel welcome to ask questions. So far I have like 6 or 7 questions. We're going to cover 3 today. 2 of them I'd already scheduled to talk about next week, so we'll get through them all. But okay, so the very first question is actually a very easy one. Somebody noticed this, and so I'm actually glad that they did. The question is, why do you have a QR code on your slides? Okay, this actually started out as a joke. If you remember the first week, I showed you that map that my brother had. Well, my brother has a QR code on his slides, and I was like, I want a QR code on my slides too. So I had my brother make this for me, but it is so that anybody who scans it actually can have copies of all my slides. Eventually, I'm going to go back and put all my notes with them. That's not going to happen until the class is over. But then that way, if you ever need them for anything, if you're just interested in referencing back to them, if you ever decide that you want to teach a class on the time between the testaments, feel free to use what I have already done. No copyright. Yes, that's right. There's no copyright on it. I mean, let's just be honest. None of this that I'm talking about is original research anyway. I am just purging information that I have learned from other people, so feel free to use it. And my understanding is it updates as I update my slides. So I've tried it a few times, but I'm not sure. Okay. I'll wait, because it's okay. Take your time. No, that's okay. I can come back to it as well if you need a minute. Oh, here come more people. Okay, excellent. All right, the next question is, several people have asked me this. If you are interested in studying about the time between the testaments, what is a good starting point? And I would highly recommend this book. I have brought this book with me every week to talk to you about, and every week I have forgotten to talk about it. So I'm really glad that somebody asked this so I could actually put it on here. This book is called Backgrounds of Early Christianity. It's written by Everett Ferguson, who is a professor and a scholar from Abilene Christian. He is still actually a professor. He's 88, but he's still working as a professor. Obviously, I don't know how much teaching he's doing now, but he's very well known in the academic community for somebody who's done a lot of research into church history. This is an incredible book. And to be honest, when I was actually started talking about teaching this class, when Jay asked me to teach this class, I told you guys I hadn't kept track of my sources because I was doing this all just for fun. And so I went downstairs and I found this book in my basement, and I thought, why on earth have I never read this book before? This book is fascinating. And then I realized I've highlighted and underlined in this book. So I apparently have read it before. So because my parents will probably watch this later on, let me just tell you that I'm very sorry that I did not pay attention while I was in school and don't remember any of that, but it is coming in handy now. So thanks for the education. All right, the last question that we're going to cover today is, what are the order of the empires and which ones have we covered? And I want to make sure that you understand that this is not a comprehensive list of empires in antiquity. These are empires that we are going to cover that have been based in the Old Testament, and so these are the ones that we're going to start with. The Assyrian Empire, very well known in the Old Testament, we did not even talk about it, period. We did not talk about it. The next one that we did talk about a little bit, the Babylonian Empire, we have already covered as much as we are going to cover. We talked about that a little bit last week with the Jews going into Egypt during the exile. Everything that we are going to cover in the Babylonian Empire, we have covered already. The Achaemenid Empire, that's where we are now. That's what we've talked about for last week. We're going to finish it this week. And then the next 3 empires we're going to be talking about soon. The Macedonian Empire is going to start as one empire. It's going to divide into an empire of 5 different countries. 5 different kingdoms take over from that. And then it's going to kind of just keep dividing. So it starts with 5, and then it's going to end up with tons. But the ones that we're going to be focused on during that time period are the the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. We talked a little bit about them last week, and I do know that I got a lot of people confused last week by skipping time periods, so we're not going to do that again. And then the Hasmonean people, or the Hasmonean people, however you want to say it, it's more of a kingdom. It's not really an empire, but it is actually a Jewish kingdom, and so that is very important to what we're going to be talking about. So we will go through that in depth, and then of course we're going to have our Romans. Our Romans are going to come in, smash everything, and then that's where we're going to actually pick up with the time of Christ. That's where the New Testament is. So those are the questions that I've covered for this week. Again, if you do have questions, please just let me know. You can come up and ask me. I'll make sure to write them down, and then we'll cover all of your questions. I really want this class to be a learning experience for you, so any questions that you have, please let me know. Okay, so moving on. Last week, we spoke about the Jews who fled to Egypt as a safe haven during exile, and today we're going to talk about the people who stayed. Remember, we talked about not everybody left. So most of the people who stayed are actually going to be the Samaritans. And so this is actually a picture of the Persian Empire, which is, again, our Achaemenid Empire. And here we have Jerusalem down here, and then Samaria wasn't actually on the map. It took me a really long time to find a map that actually had Jerusalem on it. So there was no map that had Jerusalem and Samaria, so I just added it in. So you could kind of see the difference. And really the only reason I wanted you to see this is because I want you to see the difference in the areas. The areas are, this was very interesting to me. I tried to Google how far it was between them, and nobody has a good consensus of how far it is between them, because if you want to take the highway that is currently between them, it takes about like 90 miles. But if you were just to walk straight, apparently it's about 75 miles. One person told me, I mean not told me, but told the internet that it's actually 632 miles between the two, but they can drive it in 2 hours. So remind yourselves never to ride with that person. But the main consensus is really it's going to be about 75 miles between the two, so not a super far distance. Math is important. What did you say? Math is important. Yes, it is. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. So with that, the Samaritans are going to be here. This is kind of a picture. This is actually modern day. We're going to have our two mountains are Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal. We'll talk about those in a second. Can anybody tell me the importance of Mount Gerizim in the Old Testament? Yes.
I don't know for sure. Is that where Jeroboam set up his high place for the people to worship?
That's not what we're going for. No. It was a good guess, though. It was. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anybody else want to take a guess? Okay, Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal, that is where when the people go into the promised land, Moses tells them that they're going to offer a blessing on Mount Gerizim, a curse on Mount Ebal. And so we have that mentioned 2 times in Deuteronomy. The first time he actually tells them what they're going to do. The second time he's going to tell them which tribes are going to go to which mountain to pronounce the curse and to pronounce the blessing. So the tribe of Judah is actually going to go to Mount Gerizim, which is why this one is going to stay of significance. Now you can't tell it really from the pictures, and I have tried multiple pictures to try to be able to tell the difference. But apparently Mount Ebal is more barren than Mount Gerizim. Now again, you can't really tell it. There might be a little bit more, but it's really kind of hard to tell. But it's in that, general Middle Eastern area, so really, how green does it get? Except for the areas that are clearly irrigated. Okay, so here we go. Mount Gerizim, Mount Ebal, and then this is the modern town of Nablus, but it's the ancient town of Shechem, which I'm sure if you've read your Old Testament, you've heard about. And so that is the town that is actually going to be between them, and it really is situated right here, kind of at the bottom of the mountains between the two. Okay, so Samaritans are, there's no really nice way to say this, but Samaritans are viewed as half-breeds. And the reason why that terminology was very prevalent, I know it's not politically correct to say that, but it's because the Jews, they're not full-blooded Jews. They are actually the product, a lot of them rather, are the product of the Israelites who have then intermarried with people who were already in the area, and then they had these children who then, a lot of them, because they stay in this area, they are Samaritan people. The Jewish exiles who come back, they actually feel that they are a lot more superior, I guess is just the best way to say it, because they have this new learning that they have. They've obviously had to take a lot of responsibility on learning the Torah themselves, going to synagogue, learning about these different things. So they feel that they are very, very superior. And we can definitely see that in Ezra when the Jewish people go to rebuild the temple. The Samaritans are actually the people who offer to help, which is why it's halted. And why it's halted is because they do not want to accept the help from the Samaritans, because they do not feel that the Samaritans are worshiping the same God they are. The Samaritans are in fact worshiping Yahweh, but the Samaritans have actually incorporated some additional gods into it. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that the Jews are actually doing the same thing, but the Jews are kind of doing it under the table, not really making a big deal out of it, not making altars and such that are visible. So because of that, they're really kind of just being hypocritical, to be honest. Most scholars, if you go back and read, they think that if the Jews could have humbled themselves enough to actually accepted the Samaritans' offer for help, that they would have actually been able to reconcile. They would have been able to put their differences aside and come back as one group, which would have made them a lot stronger for what's going to come further on. But instead, they deny the help. And remember the first week I told you it's going to completely break the kingdom. So this is going to be our final break, our final straw. Jews and Samaritans are going to hate each other from this point forward. So then the Samaritans are actually going to go so far as to actively try to prevent the rebuilding of the temple and the rebuilding of the walls. There is a lot of intermarriage between the Samaritans and the Jewish people. This is actually still very prevalent today. But one of the ways is that because the Samaritans had a lot of money, they had a lot of prominence within their community, the Jewish priestly people would actually go and marry these Samaritan women who had the status, and then they would have this marriage that then, I guess, the woman would eventually somehow convert to Judaism, but since it goes through the mother's line, don't really know how that worked, but anyway. And this is mentioned in Nehemiah 13:28, where actually Sanballat is actually the priest who's mentioned there. This actually carries on with Josephus, and this is going to be mentioned numerous times. Same family marrying into the same Samaritan family over and over again, just to continue to keep that kind of that line going of not only the priestly line, but also the status, if you can say that. Now, one of the things that is interesting is that when the men try to marry into the Samaritans, they are actually promised priesthoods on Mount Gerizim. So keep that in mind, because they're having to revoke their priestliness in Jerusalem in order to accept a priesthood on Mount Gerizim. Interesting, I thought. Okay, so where this is going to be, we mentioned this the first week, that the Samaritans are only going to follow the first 5 books of the Old Testament. They are strictly staying with the law, the Torah. That's what they're going to stay with, except they have their own book of Joshua that they have rewritten. Can anybody think of why Joshua would be added in and none of the other books?
Well, Joshua is where they conquer Canaan.
Yes.
And it becomes their land instead of the Canaanite.
Exactly, because Joshua's the one who's leading the people into the promised land. So Joshua is the one who is actually going to be leading the people into making these blessings and curses. So that is where Mount Gerizim is going to be mentioned our next time. It's mentioned 4 times in the Bible, 2 times in Deuteronomy, 1 time in Joshua, and then not again until John, when they talk about the Samaritans of the New Testament. So that is why they've rewritten Joshua. Their book of Joshua is very different because, again, like we talked about previously, the Samaritans believe that Mount Gerizim is going to be the holy place. They believe that they are the keepers of the law because they are the ones who stayed. They did not flee. They stayed. They are the keepers of the law. They have actually rewritten most of the text in order to show that Mount Gerizim is going to be the place to worship. So here is the Masoretic text. The Masoretic text is going to have 6,000 differences between the Samaritan text. The Masoretic text is what we have. This is what we would call the Old Testament. So essentially what happens is this group of Jewish priests and scribes go and they get every scroll that they can find and they bring them in and they start going through them. And when I say they go through them, I mean literally they mark every letter that is different, and then they go back to see how many of them have which letter in which spot so that they can make sure that they have the most accurate text that's possible. Any discrepancies were noted, and they made sure to keep a list of all the discrepancies that were noted. And then they also went through, and after they had put together the text, they put in breathing marks in places that needed to be emphasized so that when you were reading the Torah, then you have the best oral recitation of it. And it makes the most sense, and it really does highlight what the Jewish people need to know. So there are 24 books in the Masoretic text. And I want to go back to this slide for a second because this is going to show you how it's broken up. The law is actually considered to be one book, and then the rest of them by line is going to get you to 24. So as you can see, like 1st and 2nd Chronicles, 1st and 2nd Kings, that's one book. And then Ezra and Nehemiah is also one book. There's actually a lot of Bibles that will actually have Ezra and Nehemiah as one book today, even. Yes.
When you say one book, are you meaning one scroll?
Yes, yes. And so they put them in, like when you read through the Masoretic text, it's just Kings. And then, obviously not Chronicles next because Chronicles is at the end. Okay. So they had 24 books in their text, and then this has an absolute monopoly of scripture for 600 years. This is finalized in about 1000 AD. So they have gone through, they have collected these scrolls that have been since before antiquity. They have collected all of them, and they really do put this thing together, which again, that is what we have. So this is how true it is. This is what we still use today. When they go through, this is finalized in right about 1000. The oldest one that is actually known is a copy, it's called the Leningrad Codex. It's from 1008 is the year that it's dated back to, but it's complete, and they still have it today. So, I guess I did not have a slide for that. But okay, so, and the reason why it does lose its status as the only text is because in 1631, so again, about 600 years later, there's going to be another text that appears, and this one is called the Samaritan Torah. And the Samaritan Torah, again, it's going to have those 6,000 differences, but it actually shows that the high priest of the Samaritans goes through and he actually says that Ezra and Nehemiah is completely fabricated. So Ezra and Nehemiah just needs to be completely ignored because the semantic changes that Ezra and Nehemiah have made shows that the altar needs to be in Jerusalem, but the altar needs to be in Mount Gerizim. And we know that because that's what Moses says. The place of the blessing is going to be on Mount Gerizim. So they actually do not accept anything with Ezra and Nehemiah. Mount Gerizim is their place of worship. Mount Gerizim is still their place of worship today. Okay, so I wanted to show you guys some pictures. Oh, and to tell you that too, this was actually a debate from 1631 to 1947. It is not until the Dead Sea Scrolls are found in 1947 that they actually find in the Dead Sea Scrolls there's pre-Samaritan text, which shows that clearly the Masoretic text and those ancient Jewish scrolls are actually older than the Samaritan Torah. So this is a huge debate, and it went on for way longer than I thought it would have, but it did. So then one of the other questions that I had when I was going through this is if the Samaritans don't believe at all that Jerusalem is the place where you have to worship, why did they want to help build the temple? Because this doesn't make sense to me, right? They already have their temple that they built on Mount Gerizim, so why are they going to build another temple in Jerusalem? To be honest, there's really not a good answer. The answer that most people have said actually is that it's political and it's selfish because at the time, there are actually more Samaritans in this area than there are Jews. So if the Samaritans can get the Jews to cooperate with them, then the Samaritans can eventually kind of take over, and they can then change everything because they can be able to continue to worship Yahweh, and they can continue to worship their own gods simply because there's more of them. So that was really the only thing that people posited as an answer. It does not stop the Samaritans. There are still actually about 850 people in the world that still practice Samaritanism today. Most of them live in that town that I showed you, Nablus, right at the base of the mountains. Modern day Mount Gerizim is right smack kind of in the middle of Palestine. It's a little north of middle. But if you are actually living in this Nablus area and you identify as a Samaritan today, you have dual citizenship between Palestine and Israel because you can trace your roots back to Judaism. So you have dual citizenship, so all those people don't have to actually serve in the Israeli military, which Israeli military service is mandatory for people who live there. There is a group of Samaritans who live in Israel, and if you live in Israel, you do not, absolutely do not get any type of citizenship in Palestine. So they don't recognize it as a holy place, and Israel definitely trumps. They're not going to get a dual citizenship. So let's see here. Oh, and then I also wanted to point out, I mentioned that there's still intermarriage between the groups today. And one of the things I thought was kind of interesting is that if you marry in to a Jewish family today and you decide that you want to convert from Samaritanism to Judaism, you actually have to give a public declaration that you are renouncing the place of worship as Mount Gerizim. Because again, it is still such a prevalent belief today. They actually still practice Passover on Mount Gerizim. They still actually make a slaughter on Mount Gerizim on Passover. They sacrifice a Passover lamb. Jewish people do recognize that Samaritanism is a sect of Judaism. Samaritans want nothing to do with the Jews. And so again, you still see this kind of going on today. And this is obviously something that's very prevalent in the New Testament, the hatred between these two groups. And this kind of goes back and shows you a little bit why that is. So I just have a bunch of pictures now to show you. This is actually a picture of what the base of Mount Gerizim looked like. This is right about the turn of the century. This is when they started doing a lot of the excavating of Mount Gerizim. Like I said, there was a temple there. The temple is actually destroyed somewhere during the time of Alexander the Great, which is going to be our next empire that we're going to cover. So the temple there does not last very long, but you'll see that people still worship there, even though they worship kind of amidst the ruins. But this is just an ancient picture I thought was kind of interesting. This is a group of people, again, at the turn of the century, worshiping on Mount Gerizim. You can see that there are rocks from the ruins that they are still worshiping around. They do not ever decide to build another temple after their temple gets destroyed. And then eventually a church is built on it, and I have pictures of that in a second. These people, though, look at this, way before their time. Look what social distancing they have. I was very impressed. But I thought that this picture, before I even noticed that there was a second picture in there, I thought it was interesting that these people actually carried chairs up rather than, if they're going to be up there worshiping regularly, why didn't they build some type of bench or something out of all these stones? But no, they just carry their chairs. So, all right. And then this is actually the ruins of the church that was built on top of the temple. This just kind of gives you some perspective of the size. It's not a small area. So this was not by any means a super small temple. I think sometimes when we talk about the temple on Mount Gerizim, because we don't know a lot about it, we just assume it's kind of like a little altar, but it wasn't. It was a full-blown temple. So this, again, though, these are the ruins of the church. The church was destroyed, I can't really remember. I think it's somewhere around 400. It's in that 400 area, so it's clearly way after the time of Christ. This is another aerial view of the ruins. And again, just thought that was kind of gave you perspective. This is a picture of, and I know it's kind of pixelated. I love this picture. I really do. I just think it's so, like when you see it up close, you can see how excited they are to be worshiping. This is at their Passover feast that they actually have on the top of Mount Gerizim, and I just think it's really a good picture in terms of with the sunset and everything, which I think actually might be sunrise, but I'm not 100% sure. So that is going to take us down now to the end of our Samaritans. I want to stop here because this is actually going to be the last slide that we have for the Achaemenid Empire. So I wanted to stop and answer any questions that you have had up to this point about our different empires.
So Achaemenid, I'm not saying that right.
That's okay.
Is the Persian Empire.
Yes,
This
they are
is
the same.
Cyrus
Yes.
and such.
Yes.
Okay.
That is correct. Yeah. Did everybody hear her question? No. Okay. She asked if the Persian Empire and the Achaemenid Empire are the same, and yes, they are. They are. And I mean, Persian is much easier to say, so I can definitely understand that. Yeah. We'll kind of get into that with our next one too, because our Macedonian Empire turns into Greek Empire in history, but I mean, it's really kind of easier to say too, but not nearly as. Okay, other questions?
Did I get to the Greek Empire too?
Yes, that's next.
Oh, I can't wait to see that.
Well, it's the next slide, so you don't have to wait long. Okay, well, if there's any other questions that come up, if you think of them, just let me know. So, moving on then to the Macedonian Empire. All right, the Macedonian Empire is going to be a place that starts in this little town, this little country rather, called Macedon. Macedon is not known in antiquity as a good place at all. And in fact, one of the people of importance in Athens, his name is Demosthenes. He actually says in one of his texts that's been recovered, "Never yet is it possible to buy a decent slave in Macedon." So it's not even a place where they feel like they can get good slaves. Because it is such a small place, they're kind of on the outskirts of everything. So remember, at this time where Greek culture is really predominant in this area, they are definitely on the outskirts. They are outside of Athens, Sparta, and Thebes. But they do, however, unlike all those Greek cities that I just mentioned, they do get captured for a very, very brief time in the Achaemenid Empire. They get conquered for a very short time because they have this king who decides that he is going to take over. He has very big dreams. He has great ideas of all these things that he's going to do. He's going to die before that happens, but he actually has these really good ideas. One of the things that he does, Philip is his name, one of the things that he does that no other king does is he fights year-round. And the scholars actually, one of the books that I read said that this would be like if you were to use chemical warfare today. It was that devastating to people at the time. Because if you look back in our scriptures in the Old Testament, think about David, how David stays back at the time of the year when the kings go to war. So there's only a time of the year when fighting happens. But Philip is going to completely to say that is not how it's going to work here. And he's going to start conquering people year round. So he has this great idea. He actually starts building this empire, and then he is going to die. But there's one town after he dies, this little town called Thebes, because Philip is going to conquer all of our Greek empire at the time. Our Greek empire that we know, it was little. I'll show you a picture in a minute. But he's going to conquer it. They decide to rebel after Philip dies, and Alexander goes in and completely demolishes them. And this is something that Alexander does not do later on. But he demolishes them to the point that no other group of people is comfortable trying to ever rebel against him again, because he literally wipes them off the map. So this is going to become our largest empire of the world up to that point in time. It's only going to be surpassed later on with the Roman Empire. And it's going to be years and years before that actually happens. And during this time, Hellenistic thought and Hellenism, the way of life of the Greek culture, is really going to expand. This is where we're going to see the shift in culture between Eastern mindset thinking and Western mindset thinking. Because up to this point, everything has been about the good of the group, but Greece is all about the good of me. Yes.
Sorry, I don't.
You're fine.
So is Macedon, when Paul goes to Macedonia?
Yes.
This is
Yes.
the same.
This is
and
it.
is this northern Greece?
Yes. Let me show you. I think I have a picture. Okay, so this is where we're going to have, Greece is down here. Okay, so we have, it's kind of in this area. Macedon starts as this little group with Philip. When Philip is still in charge, it starts as this little country that's outlined in red. By the time that Philip is done, he has conquered this area that's in teal, and then all of these areas in yellow are going to be reliant upon Macedon for just basic resources, and they're going to be under the protectorate of that. But they are still kind of independent up to this point. When Alexander gets done, and this is a better map for you, Melody, this is going to be it. So Greece is right in here. So Macedonia is up here, and Greece is right here. So I know it's kind of hard to see, I'm sorry. But as you can see, when Alexander takes over, he's not messing around. He's going to take over.
Okay, what is there where Macedonia is today?
That's a really good question. I don't know.
Turkey.
It would be Turkey.
Where's Yugoslavia?
Further up.
Yeah, I think isn't Yugoslavia up here somewhere? Like in that area?
Okay. Because don't they have a place in Yugoslavia called Macedonia?
The city is still there, but not the country. Yeah, yeah. Yes, it is modern day Turkey.
Since we're studying Philippians,
Yeah.
King, were you going to mention this?
No, please.
The King Philip, who was Alexander's father, he's the one who founded the city of Philippi, and it became kind of a city for, it wasn't a very big city really, but it became a city for Roman soldiers to retire.
Mm-hmm.
That's why there was no Jewish synagogue there. So it's named after Philippi.
Yeah, and we're going to see that other thing too with Alexander. When Alexander starts making all these different cities throughout, they're all going to be named after people in his family. So let's go back a couple slides to talk about Alexander the Great, because that's who we, obviously, he is the one who's really going to expand this empire. As you can tell, Philip does some interesting stuff. One of the things that's interesting about Philip is that Philip is actually murdered at a wedding. And the wedding that he's murdered at is his brother to his daughter. So he marries off his daughter to his brother to try to gain some political advantage, but then he's murdered at the wedding, and Alexander's going to take over. So, and also to make it even more confusing, Alexander's uncle is also named Alexander, and his sister's named Cleopatra, but it's not the Cleopatra that we talked about last week. So just a whole bunch of names. They really need to come up with some different names. Yeah. So Alexander becomes king when he's only 20 years old. And one of the things that we really need to remember about him is that he studied for 16 years under Aristotle. And so when he gets that, he definitely has this Greek mindset already, because everything he has learned his entire life is going to be based on Greek thought, even though this is not the way of the world right now, but this is his way of thinking. So he becomes all these different things. I mean, he gets all of these amazing titles. The biggest one, of course, Lord of Asia, because he's conquered that much area by the time that he dies. He's only 20 when he starts, he's 32 when he dies. And he dies after an illness that lasts 11 or 12 days. And this is actually something that there's a lot of scholarly debate about, is how Alexander died. A lot of people think that he was murdered. And there is some good evidence, because obviously his dad was murdered at a wedding. During this time, that's what you do, right? If you want to conquer somebody, you kill them. That's just how it is. But the problem with that is it takes them 11 or 12 days to die. And to be honest, we are much more sophisticated in killing people today than they were in ancient times. And they had not yet developed slow-acting poisons. So chances are he did get some type of illness and just died. So, but I like that idea that maybe he did just die on his own, because it would be nice to think that maybe we didn't just randomly kill people just because. Although that's not really the way that it works.
Do you know anything about him possibly having epilepsy?
I have heard that. I read that, but I mean, there wasn't a lot of evidence to support that. And it's really kind of hard to tell because Alexander's body gets stolen and it gets moved from so many different places that it has so many different problems with the actual remains itself. It's kind of hard to go back and say, okay, this is what happened, and I don't know. But yes, I have heard that. I also heard that he might have had like some type of like early beginnings of typhoid fever before it was typhoid fever type thing. I don't know. I really don't know. Okay, so going on with this, I do want to point out that during this map, we are going to have Jerusalem right about here. So you can see again in our whole scope of the Macedonian Empire how little and really unimportant Jerusalem is going to be. And that is why during this time, the Jews are really going to be okay because everybody's going to be fighting on these borders. We don't have yet that people are really starting to fight amongst themselves. However, when you're not fighting a war, you're going to start fighting with each other. So we really see that. This is kind of where that snowball keeps gaining the speed going down the mountain, is that the Jews are really going to start fighting amongst themselves during this time. We also have Macedonia. This is where we started. I thought, because I wanted to make sure that everybody knew that that's where we started. This is where we're coming. And then by this point, and this is going to be key later on, Buddhism has already spread up to Bactria. And we know that because one of Alexander's wives is from Bactria. And so we know that Buddhism has already made it there. This is going to be the start of Greco-Buddhism. And again, we know our missionaries have reached this point. So our missionaries are going to keep working themselves over to the time of Christ. Okay, do we have questions up to this point?
And by missionaries, you mean the Buddhist?
The Buddhist missionaries, yes, absolutely. The Buddhist missionaries are actually not monks, but the monks accompany them. Okay. All right, so we talked about the spread of Hellenism, and so I just wanted to kind of talk about what is Hellenism. Hellenism is the Greek way of life. It is not named after Helen of Troy. A lot of people think that it is named after Helen of Troy, but it is not. It is named after this guy named Helen, who's the son of Deucalon and Pyrrha. They are the two people who survive in the Greek flood narrative. So as we talked about our first week, every ancient society has their own flood narrative. These are the two people who are going to survive the Greek flood narrative. In order to repopulate the earth, they throw stones into the water, and when they throw stones into the water, they become human. So Helen is their firstborn stone. Their first son, their first stone is Helen, and that's why it's called Hellenism. The Greek way of life actually is going to really include the focus on physical beauty, physical appearance, and everything is going to be all about the human body. If you go back and you look at Greek art, even current Greek art, it's all about the body, all about the physical form. Gymnasiums are a place where they would go to hear orators. This is the place that would actually take over as from the synagogues as the places of importance where you would go and you would do your learning. You do your learning in the gymnasiums. You have to be naked in order to go into the gymnasiums, and only men are allowed in the gymnasiums. This is going to be a huge point of contention for our Jewish people, and that is because if you are Jewish, what's going to be different and what's going to be obvious when you're naked? You're circumcised. So the Jews actually start going through, they want to fit in with the Greek people, and so they actually have a process of reverse circumcision that they do so that they can appear to be more Greek. Now, I am all about learning. I love learning all sorts of new things. So when I heard this idea of reverse circumcision, I was very intrigued. And there are some things that I now know that I really wish I did not know. And so if you are interested in learning more, then by all means, please feel free to take it on yourselves and learn more. But let me just tell you, there are things that you know, there are words in your head that you just wish that you would never know. So I was telling my brother about this idea, and I got to like 2 lines, into my story of everything that I knew about reverse circumcision, and he said, please just stop. Okay, I will. But I didn't know who else to tell, and I felt the need to tell someone. All right, and then also during this time, this is where the Greek language actually spreads. The Greek language is going to become our most popular language. And the idea of the Greek language, Greek literature, and Greek everything, the Greek culture, is really going to take off during this time. Having said that, this is where the Macedonian Empire ends. And the reason why it ends is because Alexander dies. And Alexander dies without a successor. And so when that happens, they decide to split his kingdom into 5 different areas. And it's going to be split into this group of people called the Didachi. And they're going to really just take over and split his kingdom into tons and tons of little places. There are going to be some places like Corinth that actually rebel against their new ruler, and they actually get to be their own spot. But the thing that we really are going to start focusing on next week, and I am so proud because this next slide is the very last one, so I really did make it through the entire lesson with 2 minutes to spare. We have the Ptolemies and the Seleucids who are going to be fighting for this area. And they have actually split it. You can see the Ptolemies are the blue group. They are completely surrounding some of the Seleucid groups. This is where we're actually going to see a lot of our our Jewish fighting as well, because some of our Jews had sided with the Ptolemies. Remember last week, and we talked about how some of the Jews that were in Alexandria already, they really go with the Ptolemies because the Ptolemies are very, very tolerant, very nice to the Jews. The Seleucids are not that way. But the Seleucids have really aligned themselves with the people who are more Hellenistic in thinking, because the Seleucids are all about, let's keep spreading that Greek culture. And so when they decide to do this, the Seleucids and the Ptolemies are fighting. This is going to be okay for a little bit for our Jewish people because they're, again, going to be fighting for these borders, and they're not going to be fighting for what's in Jerusalem. This is going to change on a dime, and that's where we're actually going to pick up next week. So, again, if you guys have any questions, please let me know so I can put them in my notes and make sure that we address them for next week.
Wasn't Ptolemy and Seleucid, weren't they 2 generals?
They are,
were generals
yes.
for...
They're part of the Didachi, yes. And I'm going to talk about more of that next week about how they divide up. I'm going to give you a better map, but I just wanted to let you know we're done with the Macedonians. Even though we could do an 8-week class just on the Macedonians, we're not. I'm proud that we made it through it in 1 week. Yes.
Jerusalem is in that yellow.
This is it right here. Jerusalem. That's Jerusalem.
Okay. And so this way is Egypt, and that's basically where the Ptolemies are coming.
Yes. Yes. Uh-huh. Yes. So Ptolemy and Seleucid, like he said, they're both going to be generals. They divide the area. As you can see from this map, there is no good way that they divided this, because some people are going to have lands kind of all over. And in fact, Ptolemy actually has some land up in Greece that at some point, it's like right over here, at some point he's going to lose. So they just really did some weird stuff. I don't know how they did it. But yes, so they are going to start, the Ptolemies down here really like the Jews. This antagonist is actually, the Seleucids over here, they're going to come in. They conquer antagonists. Yeah, it's going to be fun. And then that's where we're going to get the Maccabees. And y'all know how excited I am to talk about the Maccabees. Like every week, I keep thinking. Yes, ma'am.
So in your list of the books of the Old Testament,
Yes.
So you had under prophets, you had earlier and then the later prophets.
Yes.
At the end of that later prophets list, it says the 12.
Yes, the 12. All the minor prophets are listed as one.
Oh, I've seen. Okay.
Yeah, right here. All of the minor prophets, they only have Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel broken out. All of the other prophets are listed as one book. Okay.
Put your QR code back.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Here you go. Here is the QR code right there. All right, so thank you guys very much. Hope you have a good week, and I'll see you back next week. Yes, ma'am.